Okay, so you have to have the technical competence to be able to do that. How many people think ethics and technical are two separate things that don't overlap? Good. Because I've actually heard people say that they didn't have to worry about these problems because their job was the technical and not to worry about the ethical. That really scared me, and I really want to make sure they're not like designing anything that I'm involved in at all. Because I think you guys, it's great that that's not what I'm hearing from you guys. So kind of from a moral, and I think we've reached this, kind of the definitions of, morality and ethics. So philosophers will talk about these as differences to a large degree. Often, we who are not philosophers tend to use them interchangeably, and so that's okay too. But one of the distinctions to think about, at least as kind of our responsibilities, morality is basically those standards that apply to everybody. Okay, so more general morality. Whereas what happens for ethics, those become those principles we expect because we're a select group or part of a profession related to that. So that there are ethics associated with the medical profession, legal, engineering, psychology, education. All the professions actually have that. For engineers in particular, it does get to that part known as factors of safety, testing procedures, ways of designing for reliability, and things like that. So professional ethics very much is not just those aspects, but it actually does integrate the technical related into that as well. And it's in those everyday ethics decisions that you make. Okay? For example, so there's these professional ethics. How many have heard about kind of codes of ethics for different professions? Okay. So there are codes of ethics. Companies can have them. Professional organizations have them. You can, within an organization, have them as well, or you can even in your group kind of come up with codes of cooperation or codes of ethics that you expect members of your group that they've agreed to and that they're going to abide by with that. And they're all slightly different, but in each of the professions has their own codes associated with this. So we can look at that. But if we look at the one here, so from the National Society of Professional Engineers, and a lot of the other engineering ones are pretty similar to this. They hold paramount safety, only perform services in area of competence, should be not issue public statements, kind of some things related to your employer, to avoid deceptive acts, and to conduct themselves honorably. So I think these are good guidelines, and absolutely using them to guide your behavior. But then as you're trying to make that decision, I guess getting at this point, I think we would agree it's really important to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. But is it possible to make something 100% safe? No, right? How do you decide what is safe enough? That's the challenge, right? Because nobody wants to do something unsafe. But how do you decide what's safe enough? And how do you make ethical decisions in general related to this? So as you think about how to make.
I guess like let's say for aerospace, they have maybe like they have some standards that the designs have to meet. So
Okay.
I guess that could be.
All right, so you could use some of the standards, right, to help you decide what's safe enough. I think that's certainly something that could inform expectations. So if your failure rate for your device far exceeds the industry standard, that's probably not safe enough, right, related to that at a minimum. What else is an important part of thinking about safety? Yes?
If it's a commercial product, would you be willing to use it?
Okay, so if it was a commercial product, would you be willing to use it? What is the other part that becomes really important in this conversation, though, too? Why, as a commercial product or something, does it become important to think about? Yes?
Because in like the commercial market, it has to be more general and safe for everyone versus people who might know the ins and outs of like, they'll know inherently not to do a certain thing with that object versus like the general public who might not have as much knowledge about the product.
Right, so isn't there some expectation of safety, right, that we have? And that we're assuming that as, so if you decide that you want to do something, your awareness of the safety risks that you're taking actually is an important part. So are you part of the conversation, or who is part of the conversation in deciding? Do you as the engineer or the designer get to decide what's safe enough? All by yourself? No. So it's important that you're engaging your stakeholders in deciding what is safe enough. You may think that an error rate is okay for your product. What does your project partner think? What would kind of person who's using it, who's not familiar with it, think? So part of the really key things of looking at this is, you know, as far as understanding is who's part of the conversation in deciding if it's safe enough or not. So, all right, how do you make ethical decisions? Flip a coin. Use unbiased data. Actually, that's sometimes that is really important. But there's other things that often go into that as well, right? So one of the things that you can do is actually, this is a framework for thinking about it. Now, I love design, so I always like processes that look like design processes every time. But this is a moral decision-making process. But actually, if you think about it, it does make sense to maybe utilize something like this. What are the facts related to this? And actually making sure sometimes once we know the facts, we may actually be able to mitigate that. And one other thing I wanted to point out that I forgot to mention as far as assessing risk. What is a tool we can use in design to actually help us make a more informed decision about what's safe enough? That we talked about last week. The DFMEA, Design for Failure Modes Effects Analysis. You can actually go through and analyze to determine how big of a risk is it, what could we actually do to mitigate that risk in our design and not have to be something that actually causes an issue. So you can actually use a tool like that to actually figure out what it is. But you want to understand what the issue is and see if there's a way that you can find a solution that actually meets both of the needs. So with the car, was there a way that we could actually design it so the kids did have control, but it was still safe? And actually trying to figure those things out with those competing values related to that. You can look at different options for action. And so I'll show you those in just a second. Using ethical frameworks to maybe think about how you make these decisions and come up with, if I really think this is a value that is really important, if you, for example, said, I just cannot lie, that value for me is too important, how will I address this? But maybe if I say this other, I'm really thinking about the parent relationship, then if I really am valuing that, I'm going to decide something else. And kind of figuring those out, realizing that it might be, that you're balancing these different things. Okay, and then you actually do something and follow through. So the one thing here in EPICS, this is not just a theoretical thing that we sometimes just, say we can talk about, as you maybe went through when you went through the cases. There are real life situations, and probably every day in your decision making, your designing, that you actually may be facing aspects of this. Do you have to go through quite as much of a formal process? It probably depends on the complexity of what it is you're thinking about, but then you can actually do that. And the other really important thing is that follow through. So you can reach a theoretical or philosophical agreement about what's the right thing to do, but often it takes courage, ethical courage, to actually follow through, because sometimes doing the right thing is a hard thing to do. So it really is important. Okay. These come from philosophy, and without going into an idea of saying that we're going to look at, understand, become philosophers and understand utilitarianism or, those different kinds of ethical frameworks, they still can provide ways to look and challenge how you're thinking about the situation. So if your concern is the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, you may end up with a decision that might be different than if maybe you're saying, what's the option for the best for those who are in need. Okay, but if you go through and evaluate with those different perspectives, it can help you find where you need to be on that. All right. So what you had was a framework, and we're almost out of time, but don't move yet because I still have one more very important slide. But if you want to think about how might you step through, you can walk through and identify some of those same issues for the car example, okay, if you want to think about that. And/or you can use this example in your teams. If you're actually faced with trying to find the balance with that, you can use that, okay? So, okay, I have 2 slides, I forgot. Ethical issues. Anybody thinking about any ethical issues on their team? So if you can think of it now, this is something good to reflect on in your reflections. And I guess one of the other things, so any of these issues could be there. Safety, sustainability. Maybe some of you are doing things that would require human subject or kind of IRB approval or FDA kind of approval, things like that. So are participants informed about participating in that? And there are others. And what do you do if you face an ethical issue on your team? Huh? Discuss it, absolutely. Talk to your advisor, talk to your TA. Come talk to me if you have any concerns about that. But I think it's important. Okay, this is my last slide. Or I have 2 slides, but okay. This is my last point. So I just wanted to, I think that there's an ethical consideration in what we do when we talk about using people first language. Anybody who's heard of people first language before? Okay, so it's when you talk about people, especially used with people with disabilities, as people first and not as a group. by their disability. So, basically it might be even handicapped person or somebody's the autistics, or they may describe somebody as being confined to a wheelchair. So these are languages that I think it's first of all not very appropriate. But the other thing that has come into, and I'm sorry I keep pointing to all these things that have happened, but one of my very first semesters with EPICS, I was in a design review. Actually, I think I was getting ready to start my position, and somebody was talking about they were designing for this person, but they're pretty much a vegetable, so I didn't even need to worry about this. And I thought, okay, not only am I really offended by your language, I'm pretty sure you're not doing a very good job designing if that's how you're picturing and thinking about the person you're designing for and with. So those are the things that I think becomes really important, that if we can't figure out the right way to talk about maybe populations we're working with, then we're not doing a good job at our teams at all.
What did you mean by PC?
Politically correct. So it's beyond it's not the right way to talk about. People are used, terminology. I think it really affects how we are as designers. Yep. So if you think about ways about doing this, and I've heard though, like, oh, these kids are suffering with whatever. Now I will agree. I have with my son, there are times where it's really, really, really hard about having autism. But I would not talk about his world, that there are also very happy times and good times as well. So thinking about somebody and only the negative of perhaps that disability is actually not a very positive way to think about it. So he has autism, you use a wheelchair. Those are things that you can use to really kind of describe, instead of crippled and, that there are a lot of other things related to that. Any questions? But I think it's just a good philosophy. It puts that person first, whoever you're designing for. If you think about this, it actually can, improve what you're doing as far as what you're doing as designers. Okay. That is it. Good luck with design reviews next week. I think Miranda and I think Logan are going to run up there and they'll collect Scantrons.